So you want to write an offer, right? If you've been doing open houses, talking to the people getting people to agree to work with you exclusively, the moment of truth has come, right? They say they'd like to buy a house. Now, I'm not going to go into pricing strategies and all that kind of stuff. Right now, I just wanted to cover what do you do when somebody says they want to buy a house, right? Now, first of all, I believe that we ought to make our lives as easy as possible. Doesn't that sound like a real estate agent, right? Right? The easy as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by picking a house in Morgan Hill, Gilroy, let's say, and I'll narrow this down. I want a 5-bedroom house, and I don't want it to be any more than 20 years old. Can I do that in Morgan Hill? Yes, I can. In Morgan Hill and Gilroy, I can get a 5-bedroom house under 20 years old. It's only $3,298,000. Does that seem like a good price? Well, anyhow, it's not about the house, right? This is just a dump. That's my house, actually. That's where I live in Morgan Hill. No, it's not. Would I be here now talking to you if I owned that house? Probably not. Probably not. So why we want to start? So let's just start with making your life easy. And what that would require that you do is to connect your MLS and RPR to zip forms, right? If you don't know how to do that, you could go and Google search, how do I connect zip forms, RPR, and the MLS. Now, if you're in the territory of MLS listings, I will do that as a sample. But let's say you're in MLS listings territory. Now, there's a way to do this in Bridge and all the others. I know there is. But what you want to do is see where it says My Info. I'm going to open that in a new tab. And what we're looking for is NRDS number. Does everybody see that? I don't know if you realize this, but you're supposed to have your NRDS number tattooed someplace on you, visible to clients. Did you know that? No, it's not. That was I was not accurate, by the way, about the tattoo requirement. But most people do not know they have an NRDS number, nor do they know what it is. Guess how you would find your NRDS number? You go to Google and you type in, how do I find my NRDS number? And it'll tell you. Now, I believe Bay East requires NRDS to log in. I know that San Francisco SFAR uses NRDS. So if you are a member of those and logged in a lot, you probably know it. MLS listings uses the DRE number as a login. This is not the same thing. Now, if yours is blank, you need to find your NRDS number and put it in here. What this is going to do is that is what connects the MLS to zip forms. You understand what I'm saying? It connects the MLS to zip forms. So why is that important? Because it's going to make it really easy for us to write an offer. And the reason is because zip forms will import all of the data from the listing directly into the form, so I don't have to manually type in the APN number, the street address, the city, the state, the zip, the county, the name of the seller. I don't have to do any of that, right? It'll just import it. That's if it's in MLS listings. It will import the information. If it's not a listing in MLS listings, then you can still import most of the data through RPR. Now, just as for instance, now this one is in MLS listings, but what I'm going to do is go to RPR. I'm going to put it in. And this, by the way, works with off-market properties. Notice this button here after the stars, it says zip form transactions. Do you see that? Zip form transactions. It's right next to the stars. If I click on that, it'll launch zip forms and import the information from RPR into zip forms. But the MLS Direct Connect is better. All right. So this is another class. By the way, I have a video which I posted on my YouTube channel called How to Connect MLS listings, RPR, and zip forms. It's on my YouTube channel. my YouTube channel, right? Plus videos of cats playing guitars and a whole bunch of things, interesting things. All right, so let's assume now that you've done that. The other thing that you ought to do if you're going to write offers is in zip forms. This is the preliminary stuff, and then we're going to go through a practical how to fill out the contract session. But most of the time I spend helping agents fill out the contract is watching them struggle to connect their software to the different places. So what you also should do in zip forms is create a template. And you would do that. By the way, if you do not know how to create templates in zip forms, Google search, how do I create templates in zip forms? Right? And you will find videos and articles. Or you could just be brave and click on templates and then click on new. Right? You could be brave. Now, what this would look like, let me have a sample buyer template. I don't know why I created that one, but this is a buyer template that I've created. And I'm going to open it up just so you can see what I've done. So in my buyer template, I have a bunch of things, maybe more than you want. But one of the things that I filled out in my template is part of the cover sheet. Now, for a template, I don't know who the buyer is. I don't know who the seller is. I don't know what the property is. I don't know who the escrow officer is, but at least I know who I am. Isn't that important to know who you are, right? Once you've learned that, then it all goes downhill. But now that I know who I am, what I do is I go in to the cover sheet, and where it says buyers, brokers information, I fill it all out. I put in the office BRE number, I put in my BRE number, I put in my name, I put in my email, I put in everything. Now what that means is I don't have to do that every time I write an offer. If you write one offer a year, you're doing better than most. No, if you write one offer a year, you probably have enough free time to manually type in everything one finger at a time, right? However, if you're planning on doing this more often than once a year, this will save you a whole lot of time, right? Does everybody? So now when I launch this, all of my information is automatically filled out. I don't have to do it. All right, does everybody understand that? So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the dashboard, and I'm going to assume that you're going to create a transaction, right? We're writing an offer. See the button that says create a new transaction. We're going to click on that. And this is going to give us our choices. Since we're writing an offer, we're going to say new purchase or offer. We're going to click on that. And then it's going to pop up, and I just copy and paste in the information about the property. And I use a add-on program that, it's not the right one. I thought I copied the MLS number. So let me go back. What we want to do is copy this MLS number, including the ML, right? We're writing an offer on this dump in Morgan Hill, right? And what is it? 6,700 square foot house, a nice little Morgan Hill house. So we've copied the MLS number, and see where it says MLS Connect over here? We're going to click on that. And if yours does not say something up in this box, now if you're in MLS listings, it's going to look like mine. If you're in Bridge, it's going to probably say Bridge. If you're in Barris, it'll say Barris, or SFAR, it'll say something else. I don't really know what those say. I just know what mine says. If yours is blank, then it means the MLS is not connected to your zip form account. That's what it means, right? If it doesn't say anything. But you guys look like you're all with it, know what you're doing, so I'm sure all of yours are connected. I'm going to copy in the MLS, paste in the MLS number. I'm going to include the property photo. Why not? And I'm going to click on Find and wait for it. All right, there it is. It found the house. I'm going to say use that listing. Now, it also allows me to select a template. So I'm going to pick a personal template that I've made called Buyer Century 21. And yes, you'll see names of some of the agents I work with. Some of those I've created templates for them. So if I'm writing an offer, it won't take very long if I'm helping them. So I'm going to click on that. I could write in comments, but I never have. I might say this is residential, but it's sort of going to figure it out. The status is active. Notice it gives me some other choices, but I don't really care about that. What happened to my template? Here's the Buyer Century 21. I'm going to click on Save. And what it's going to do is it's applying the template to that particular transaction. So, and by the way, one of the things you're going to need to get good at, hopefully, is how to use zip form software. Right? The board has training. There's webinars every week. They have a YouTube channel. You know, there's a lot of people like me on YouTube that have done classes on it. So what we're going to do is look at the parties. And notice what it's done is it's told us, now homeowner, it says seller one. What that means, for some reason, it doesn't know right off the bat who the homeowner is. That's not a big deal. People ask me, what do you do if the name of the seller is, you don't know? You could either ask the listing agent or let the listing agent put it in. I don't know, right? But it didn't seem to, it just brought in homeowner. Maybe it does have information. No, not seller one. Let me just see what it's pulled in. Because the name should be a person's name, right? So it didn't get that. It's not perfect. But notice it has the listing agent and it has my information. Now I'm going to click on buyer, and what I'm going to do is at this point, I would type in the name of the buyer. Right, and I put in the email. By the way, you don't want to put in anything else. So don't put in anything else. Do not put in the buyer's phone number. Do not put in the buyer's address. The reason you would is if you were using Zip Form's customer relationship management software, which I have never met anyone that is. Maybe you are, but I've never met anyone that uses it, so we don't want to put it in. The downside of putting in too much of this information is that it populates it on the offer form, which you're going to give to the listing agent. I know you're going to find this hard to believe, but there's a real estate agent, I shouldn't mention the company, but it's RE/MAX. And what he was doing before he went and spoke to the ethics committee is when there were multiple offers, he would go through them, and when he had a listing, and he would look up the contact information of the buyers that were in the offers that were presented on his listing, and he would contact them to see if he could get them to switch. Now, if you want to get your offer accepted next time, you need me as your agent. That sort of thing, right? Until there was a hearing about it and all that sort of stuff. You understand there's no reason to tell the listing agent your buyer's cell phone number or where they live. No good one I could think of. But we do want email. Email does not get auto-populated. So we're not telling the listing agent their email, but we need that if we're going to use electronic signatures, right? Which you're going to want to do. So we filled it out. Billy B. Buyer, right, is our buyer, our hypothetical buyer. And so and by the way, you don't really need, if you know the seller's information, you wanted to put that in, we could find it. And how would we find it? Let's just see what RPR says. So usually RPR and the MLS are bringing their information from the same place. So this actually has, it's a trust. Reynolds Charles H. Trustee. So if I wanted to, I could have put that in, but notice it wasn't perfect, right? I might actually have to put in the name of the seller. But we're not going to worry about that now, are we? So Does everybody understand what we're doing to be ready? We're going to connect MLS, RPR, zip forms, import as much as we can. We might actually have to fill out something, but now we're going to write the offer. So there are documents, right, as we go across the top. Documents. And I have a whole bunch of them here, but today we're talking about the good one, the residential purchase agreement. Which is better to have a signed listing or a signed purchase contract? If you were an agent, which would you rather have? That was the audience participation component of the class.
Signed purchase contract.
Signed purchase contract. Yes, because you understand you don't get paid to take listings. Right? You only get paid when somebody signs, a buyer and a seller sign a contract and it closes. Right? So could our purchase contract contain an agreement to pay a commission? Let's say this is a different class, but let's say you're writing an offer on a for sale by owner, expired listing, or any property that is not in the MLS. We have to use other forms in addition to this. Because where does it say that you're going to get paid a commission if you find a buyer on a listing? And the answer is it says that in the MLS. But if it's a for sale by owner, an expired listing, a notice of default, a distressed property, something that's being sold off market, we need to use another form, right? I'll do another class. So here's the stack. We start with the agency disclosure form, right? And we make sure we check, if there's one buyer, we check the buyer. And this is what I say about the form. And by the way, oftentimes the first time I'm doing this, I might be doing it in a conference room with a screen. I might actually print it out and go through it with them. It depends upon whether or not you have technologically proficient clients or not. Some people just want to see it on a screen, whatever. But this is what I say. The first form is called agency disclosure. This is not a contract. This is not a contract. This is sort of an educational form. It's my job to explain to you that there's three kinds of agency. Number one, there's the seller's agent. That's us. We represent you. That's the listing agent. Never mind, I was in a different class for a moment there. That's the listing agent. The listing agent doesn't represent you. The listing agent represents the seller, and their job is to get the best price for the seller. Then I'm going to be the buyer's agent. That means you're my client, and my job is to get you the best price and the best terms. And then we could be a dual agent. And that's if you were going to buy one of my company's listings, right? If you decided to buy one of our office listings, then we, in the royal sense, we would be representing both the buyer and the seller. Any questions? They said, no, great, right here. Sign, you first, you next, go to the next page. Now the next page, what I tell people, is a copy of the California Civil Code. It's required that it be on the back. I tell people this is really good if you have insomnia some night, right? Having trouble sleeping, start reading this page. All right. Then the next page is possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. Does everybody have all these forms? You look like you're everybody, I don't know. And the PRBS form says that I may not be the only agent from Century 21 writing an offer on this listing at this time. I don't know of anyone else that is, but we're a big company and I have no control over that. Do you understand? Other agents from our company might be representing other buyers and writing offers at this time, and they might win and we might lose. They're not going to tell me, I'm not going to tell them, but do you understand that's possible? They say, yeah, sign here, push hard, and then we go on to the next one. Wire fraud advisory is basically, all I say about this is a common sense thing about don't, wire your deposit money to people you're not sure of. Right? We'll control all this very carefully, but did you know that emails get hacked and that people try to fish with emails. And anyhow, this is just a form that says, you know, watch out, and we'll talk more about that when the time comes. Sign here. Now we've come to the good part, right? This is the purchase agreement. A couple of comments that I would make at the beginning for those of you that are industrious, serious, want to learn how to do this, right? Which is all of you, obviously. I can tell from the eager looks on your faces. What you ought to do is read this contract aloud several times a week until you know which paragraph is it that talks about the buyer's inspection contingency? Anyone know? Which paragraph is it that talks about when escrow is going to close? Which paragraph is it that talks about who pays which costs? Where does it say how long the contingency periods are? Now, by the way, that's 12, 7, 8, and 14B, right, is the answer to that group. So would it be more effective if you were a real estate agent that actually knew where stuff was in the contract, rather than having to go through the pages looking for it, sometimes handing some pages to the clients to ask them to see if they could find it on those pages while you're looking on other pages? Would it be better if it showed that you actually understood where everything was in the purchase agreement? Wouldn't that be nice? The other thing, those of you that are eager to do that, read it aloud a few times every week, is to take a yellow highlighter and go through the purchase contract, and we're looking for two things. One is every time it uses the word shall, S-H-A-L-L, buyer shall, seller shall, right? Where does it say that in the contract? And what you're going to find is that every place where it uses the word shall, somebody's supposed to do something. And it would be good for you to focus on what parts of the contract require who to do what. The other thing that you might want to highlight is everywhere it says is a contingency of this agreement. Paragraph 12 says buyer's acceptance of the condition of the property and any other matter affecting title is a contingency of this agreement, right? Page 2, the appraisal says this is a contingency of the agreement. Loan, this is a contingency of the agreement. Paragraph 8B says that leased solar and lien solar equipment acceptance is a contingency of this agreement, right? You understand, we want to know where all the contingencies are, and everywhere it says shall. All right, how are we doing? All right, is this fun? So date prepared, that's today. What if I'm not presenting the offer till tomorrow? What if the buyer won't sign it until tomorrow? Should I put in today's date or tomorrow's date? Why do I always know that there'll be a pause?
Today's date.
Today's date. That's the date prepared, right? That's not the date signed, and it's not the date accepted. So notice how it's already filled out a lot of information for me. Right, I don't have to put in the APN number. It may have missed the name of the seller, but whatever. And then we put in, we're gonna lowball them. How much did I put in? 3 million, right? We're gonna lowball them. Only gonna offer 3 million. And then in paragraph D, it says close of escrow, and you get two choices. One choice is so many days after acceptance. And the other one is put in a date. Which would be more definite and certain? A date. What could be wrong with saying in 30 days? For example, is
Escrow might not close on the weekend.
It might be a Saturday or a Sunday or a legal holiday. What does the contract say happens if a contingency or a contract date falls on a weekend or a legal holiday?
It'll be the next business
It
day.
rolls over to the next business day. Now, you might think that's safe, but let's say it's a closing date and it's Sunday. That means it rolls over to Monday. Mondays have their own issues for closing. And the issue you have on closing on Monday is you needed to fund on Friday. And then the buyers are going to be charged a weekend worth of interest. How many of you have ever had clients that would complain about that? And when they found out, asked you to pay because you put it on, maybe I'm the only one who's ever had people like that. Right, so you understand if it's going to close on Monday, it has to fund on Friday usually, unless you got a really special lender and a good title company. And then that's a weekend. Yeah. So sometimes it's better. How about what's wrong with Friday? Any of you ever had to deal with Chase? Oh man, that's exciting because they draw loan docs a day after they're supposed to. Right, every time, just about. They're slow on drawing the loan docs, and that means it doesn't always close on the day that Chase says it's going to close. And if we pick Friday as the close of escrow date, and anything goes wrong, now we're back to Saturday, Sunday, rolling over to Monday again. I like Tuesday, Wednesday, right? You understand? We got a little bit of lead time in the week. We got a couple of days afterwards in case something, needs to be handled. I'm just saying, right? I'm just saying. So I'm going to, and by the way, let's say your lender says they can close in 17 days. How many days would you close it? What would you put on the contract? Don't everybody blurt out the answer at once. My suggestion is 30. Now, how many of you have ever had a lender not close on time? Yeah. So do they making the 17-day, that means there's no issues with appraisal, no reviews that need to be done. The underwriter has no questions about what's going on. Nothing is made. Did you understand that's a problem? So if the seller doesn't need a quick close, right? So you should have called the listing agent up and say, hey, my name's Mike, this is doing one. I have some clients. We're thinking about writing an offer on your listing. Do you have any offers yet? Right? If they say yes, ask them how much. I would tell you if it was my listing. I'd tell you what the highest one is so you could beat it. Right? Is there anything special the seller is looking for in the contract? A rent back? A quick close, sometimes a long close. Sometimes they don't want to close quickly. So I would always, even if the lender said I can do it in 17 days or 21 days, I would put in 30 unless there was a really good reason not to. Right? Chase told me 17 days. Yeah. It's like 40 days. And we closed the transaction. There were some things that came up. So we're going to pick a date. And yeah, you could change it, but I don't like to. I'm a lazy real estate agent, and so I do not like. So how about that Wednesday, the 27th of March? Does that seem like a nice day? 30 days, right in the middle of the month of the week. So brokerage firm, what we want to do is say if the broker represents the seller. I don't know why it's doing this, seller's agent, brokerage firm, same thing. No, we don't have his license number, but it's the same one. I don't necessarily always worry about putting in the other agent's information. I'm representing the buyer. Does everybody see the boxes I'm checking? The listing agent represents the seller. They could represent both the buyer and seller if it was a listing of ours. And by ours, I mean Century 21 Real Estate Alliance, not Century 21, right? Not Century 21, our broker number. And then typically I'm representing just the buyer, but if it was our listing, I would be checking both buyer and seller for both of us. Is everybody, is that clear so far? All right. Now it talks about finance terms. I have a general theory about filling out forms, and that is do not feel compelled to write something in just because there's a blank space. What does the default setting say that you should do with your deposit? Anybody know? Check, cash, red envelope with cash slid under the title company door. What are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do with your money for the deposit? What is the default setting?
Within 3 business days.
How? What is the default setting? It's right on the screen. Electronic funds transfer. That's what it says. It says buyer's deposit. Buyer shall deliver deposit directly to escrow by electronic funds transfer. Is that what it says? How many of you have buyers write checks and you take pictures of the check and you show it to the listing agent? Stop. Right? Stop doing that. Just stop. Right. First of all, if you hold the check, you're supposed to write it in our trust journal that you held the check. If you're not using a Sharpie to block off their routing number and account number, you're giving somebody a great opportunity to steal their identity and create and take all the money out of their checking account. And the reason we did that in the first place is because the banks wanted us to. The banks ruined the real estate business when there were all these REOs. And by the way, did you realize that the contract says that if you are going to give them a check, you have to give the seller and the listing agent the original and not a copy? Did you know that? That's what the contract says. Where does it say that? It says deposit checks given to agent shall be original signed check and not a copy. How do you want to give the listing agent and the seller the buyer's check? The answer is no, you do not want to do that. They might, cash it, right? You know what I'm saying? So just don't do the check. Does making a copy of a piece of paper prove anything? I take out a check, I write $12 million, and then we make a copy of it. And what does that prove? That I have a blank check and a pen. That's about all that it proves. So don't argue with electronic funds transfer. Right? Just leave it and don't have people, don't do that anymore. Right? I'm just saying. Don't do that anymore. My suggestion, right? Whatever, you can do what you want. You're an independent contractor. Could the buyer bring a personal check even though it says electronic funds transfer? Yeah. Would the title company send them away?
No.
Cashier's check, right? So they could choose, as long as their money ends up within 3 business days, everything is cool, right? As long as that happens. How much should the deposit be? Well, I think what is 3% of 3 million? 90,000? How about that? 90,000, let's just say. So we're not gonna check into these other boxes. We're not, the other one, now this may start to come back. Old days was we would make a 1% deposit and then raise it to 3% when the contingencies were removed. Because the seller's not going to be able to keep the money anyhow until the contingencies are removed. Right, now we haven't been doing that because it's been a seller's market. But you understand it's less so. Right, now we're making offers with contingencies, appraisal and the whole group. Right, and so I'll bet that people stop giving them 3% up front, but say 3% when they remove the contingencies. We're not going to mess with that. I'm just saying that's another class. If it's an all cash offer, you click on the box that says all cash offer. Should we then also on the next page say no loan contingency? You're a chatty group today. So the answer is no. Once you've selected all cash offer, it eliminates the ability to talk about loan contingencies. Why would it do that? Because you said it was an all cash offer. First loan. So we're going to put in the loan amount. I'm going to assume 4 million. What are we? No, we're offering 3. How about 3 million? We're going to get a $3 million loan. How about that? That's too much. That's 100% financing. How about a $2 million loan? All right, how about that? Now, you can write in things like interest rate and points if you're making loan a contingency. Now, we haven't been doing that, but are we in a market where interest rates might go up? And if it goes up, and so what we might do is say, and by the way, the default setting is conventional financing. It should be at a fixed rate not to exceed, let's say 4.5%. And points not to exceed 0.01. right? It doesn't allow me to put in 0. Now, by putting in an interest rate and points, what I'm saying, if I make loan a contingency, that the loan is a contingency based upon that interest rate. So if interest rates go up to 5%, my buyer does not have to buy the house because we made that a contingency. If you don't put in an interest rate and interest rates go up to 5%, that's not a contingency. So in other words, you could say, well, the loan is a contingency, but then you're going to have to prove the lender wouldn't lend the money to your client at 5%. And a lot of times the lender would say, sure, we would. We'd lend you the money at 5.5%, right? And so that doesn't help you. If you don't put in something, then that does not become part of the contingency, right? FHA, VA, man, you're not going to see many of those in Santa Clara County. If you do, talk to us. Verification of down payment and closing costs. You should be checking verification attached. And what that is also known is of your proof of funds, which, by the way, could be a screenshot from somebody's cell phone of their bank account. It could be screenshots of their stocks account, their bank accounts. You're supposed to show proof. It could be a letter written by their bank that says this is a certified that Billy D. Buyer has $1 million in cash to devote now. Right? By the way, and if you don't have that, ask yourself the question, why are you writing the offer? Right? If you don't have evidence that the person can buy the house. Appraisal contingency, we used to check is not contingent back in the crazy days, but I would make appraisal as a contingency unless there's multiple offers and your clients understand the perils of not having it. Right. Does everybody understand what the peril is? It might have. I had one 2 years ago appraised for $100,000 less. And the appraisal was not a contingency. That means the buyer had to come up with an extra $100,000 to close. Right? They were already prepared for that, but you understand that's a surprise. You know, so appraisal, do you need, how long does it take to get an appraisal? 17 days? Anybody know? How long would it take to get an appraisal?
About 7 or 8 days.
So put in 10. Sometimes they're a day late. Sometimes you might want it reviewed. Put in 10. By the way, what I tell buyers is you can't overpay for the property. You do not have to worry about overpaying for the property. The reason you're never going to overpay for the property is appraisal is a contingency. Who's got the most money in the transaction, the buyer or the bank? Bank. Is the bank going to be conservative?
Yes.
Are they going to be cautious? And the answer is yes, and they're going to have it appraised. They either will or won't appraise. If it does appraise, you can be confident, comfortable in your decision because an independent expert has said this is the value. If it doesn't appraise, you don't have to buy the house, and we can renegotiate the price. The next paragraph, loan applications, you should have checked the box that says letter attached. Otherwise, you're writing an offer for somebody that you don't know can afford to buy a house. They might turn out to be bankrupt, unemployed, and a convicted arsonist. There's a joke there someplace. But it's unlikely the bank is going to give them a loan to buy a house. That's my point. Loan contingency. This says that it is a contingency of this agreement. Remember, I was talking about contingencies. Look at appraisal. It says this agreement is contingent upon a written appraisal of the property, no less than the purchase price. Loan contingency says that buyer shall act in good. Buyer's qualification for the loan specified is a contingency of this agreement. Right, we're going through contingencies too while we're going through this. I'm not doing all the shalls. So if you have a pre-approval letter, you should be saying the letter is attached. It would be better if your buyers had already had their loan package submitted to underwriting. That takes about 2.5 weeks. The question is, when do we feel comfortable removing a loan contingency? When would we normally remove a loan contingency?
When the underwriter approves it.
When the underwriter tells us to. Would it be better if the underwriter already told us to?
Yeah.
Then we could make the offer without loan as a contingency. Would that make our offer stronger?
Yep.
Without offering more money, would we still be stronger if we didn't have a loan contingency? How long does it take for the loan contingency? Well, it says 21 days. That's assuming you're starting right now. You should be in a position to say 10. You should be in a position to say 10. That's my opinion. Now, there's some logic to having a couple of more days for the loan than the appraisal, because sometimes, whatever. But I usually have them the same length of time because I don't want to keep track of too many different dates. Loan and appraisal, 10 days. Who should tell you whether or not that's feasible? A 10-day loan contingency. The loan agent. Right? Do you need a loan agent that you can trust?
Yes.
Yeah. Because if they say, sure, no problem, 10 days, no loan contingency, that's the box we would check if our pre-approval was solid. They've done DU. What does that stand for, DU? Desktop underwriting, is that what you said? Well, that's what I'm gonna go with that. DU, desktop underwriting, is a quick underwriting guidelines that are done by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, one of them. They each have their own. What I'm saying is if you've already submitted it to underwriting and the underwriter has blessed the loan package, then you would check no loan contingency. Right? That's not, now, one of the things, what is a contingency? You should think of a contingency if you're representing the buyer. You're on a boat in the ocean, bounced around, it's starting to sink. And every contingency represents an escape hatch to get out of the boat and not go down with it. An escape hatch. Now, there's more than one, but every time we remove a contingency, we're locking closed one of the escape hatches. I'm just saying. Lender limits on buyer's credit. What that paragraph says, let's say I tell the buyer, the seller says to the buyer, I'm going to give you a $10,000 credit. Right? So we want the seller to give the buyer $10,000 credit, which would be towards closing costs. But the buyer only has $6,000 in closing costs. What happens to the other $4,000? Does the buyer get to take it off the price? What does the contract say? It says sellers relying on limits any credit if the total credit allowed by buyer's lender is less than the contractual credit, then the contractual credit shall be reduced to the lender's allowable credit. So if you say in the contract, we're going to give you a $10,000 credit, and there's only $6,000 of closing costs or allowable credit, you just don't get the other $4,000. Your buyer is not entitled to getting the other $4,000 some other way. How could we increase our closing costs? One of you must know. How do we increase our closing costs if we're the buyer? Could we pay points? What does it do for us if we pay points? Lowers the interest rate. So maybe, but you understand, you got to be thinking if you have a buyer, like I've had buyers, where if it's at $10,000, they really want it all $10,000, right? You just need to understand it's whatever is less. Buyer stated financing. Now I've had many people say that my summary of this paragraph is not in the spirit of the paragraph, but this is my summary of paragraph K. Paragraph K says to me that it doesn't matter what we do as long as we close on time. It says seller is relying on buyer's representation of the type of financing specified, including but not limited to all cash, amount of down payment, or contingent or non-contingent loan. Seller has agreed to a specific closing date, purchase price to sell to buyer in reliance on buyer's covenant. That means an agreement concerning financing. Buyer shall pursue this financing. However, and then it says, seller has no obligation to cooperate with buyer's efforts to obtain any financing other than that specified in the paragraph. The agreement and the availability of does not excuse buyer. So that paragraph, the last part of that paragraph to me is expressing what will happen if the buyer does something else. Let me give you an example. The offer says all cash. Is that a stronger offer?
Yeah.
All cash. Seller shows proof of funds. They have the cash. It's a 30-day close. Now, if I'm the listing agent, I'm already suspicious. All right, because you don't need 30 days for cash. All right, you need a day or two. So what might happen is that the buyer is actually going to get a loan. They could have paid cash, but they choose not to. So when would the listing agent and the seller find out that the buyer's financing is different from what it said in the contract? At what point in the transaction would they be able to uncover this?
When there's an appraisal,
No, it's not in the appraisal.
or when the number of days is long.
Well, only if we can't. This says as long as we close on time. This is my interpretation. As long as we close on time, we're good. That's what my interpretation. It says that the seller does not have to give us an extension or cooperate in any way if we choose something else. So as long as this is the answer. I'm answering my own questions. They won't know until the loan docs are drawn what you're signing. So when does this happen? At the last minute, right? Doesn't matter. So is it possible that the offer might show 20% down, but in fact you end up with an 80-10-10, an 80% first and a 10% second? When would they know you're doing that? Well, when the escrow company sees the loan docs, then they would know it's different, but they don't even care at the escrow company. You just go and sign off.
So what I heard you just say, that paragraph means, as long as they close on time, it doesn't matter how they structure that financing.
That's what it says to me.
But what happens if
They don't close,
pay that?
then they could lose their deposit.
Okay.
They could, theoretically, lose their deposit. There's a basketball saying, no harm, no foul, right? You understand, if it doesn't delay the close of escrow,
Yeah.
they don't care what you do. Now, could that create some strategic offers where if your buyer says, look, I have the cash, but I don't want to, you're not listening to me, I don't want to pay all cash. Just wait a second. You don't have to pay all cash. But if we show all cash, this is a way stronger offer. And you're going to save money. And then you can go get a loan. But you have to close on time. Huh? Supposing there's no, anyhow, let's just keep going. Sale of buyer's property. If you're checking this, you should have talked to somebody. Because this is a hard offer to get through. Harder. And if you click on, in other words, this is saying the buyer has to sell their own property in order to buy this one. When we check that box, a form will launch called the COP form, or the COP, condition of property form, and it says that the property sale is a contingency. By the way, when that form launches, and that's a whole nother class, I might just go through all the forms. It's always a fun class. What that form asks, the question is, has your client's property been listed already? Is it in escrow? Now, do you understand, if you're making an offer contingent upon the buyer's sale of their property and they don't even have it listed yet, this is a really weak offer. Right? You understand, very few sellers are going to want to take their home off the market on the hope that you're going to price yours right and sell it within another 60 days. So we're assuming you're not doing that. You probably shouldn't be checking any of these other boxes unless you're doing something different. Right? You understand, if there's a probate advisory or whatever other terms, do not feel compelled to write in some poetry or something here, you know, a little rhyme, you know. I've seen that. Agents write little poems and put them in there. So this is where you would be asking for, you might say you're related to the buyer, you might say you're giving the buyer all of your commission and then some, whatever but we don't need to do that. You should have by now figured out whether or not the listing agent has any disclosures. Do they have a natural hazard disclosure? Did they give you one? And if the answer is no, somebody has to pay for one. You would check that box. If the answer is yes, they've given you one, then I just don't check anything. Are there different kinds of NHD reports? Do they all contain environmental? No, not all. They used to not all. But you want to make sure it's got the environmental as well as all of the others, because there might be environmental hazards. So unless there's something like that, don't check it. If they already have given you an NHD, just leave this alone. All right, you understand? This is who's going to pay for what? Allocation of costs. So if there's no NHD, you would probably be checking it and ask the seller to pay for it. How many of you have your favorite NHD company? You went to see that the lawyer from Property ID, she's very persuasive, right? You think, oh my gosh, it has to be Property ID. You could say, we want Property ID. I want JCP. I want one, right? Now, if the seller's already got one, don't tell them you want a different one. You understand? I just wouldn't. Government requirements and retrofit. Generally, you'd pick the first one. Seller shall pay for smoke alarm and carbon monoxide device installation and water heater bracing. When would you not check that? By the way, that is pretty much the only things, those three, that you're required to do when you sell property. When might we not check the box for the seller and check the box for the buyer? Let's say it's a fixer-upper and they got no money and it's just it's a dump. Right now, by the way, the appraiser is not going to be happy if they do not see smoke detectors, carbon monoxide, and water heating, and they're going to hold the appraisal until it's done. I've had agents drive to Home Depot, go buy one, drive over, and stick it on the wall so that the appraiser could see it. Right? I'm just saying this needs to be done before you're going to sell the property. Paragraph 2 talks about who shall pay for the cost of any minimum mandatory government inspections and reports and compliance with other minimum mandatory. Now, most of the things that are referred to in paragraph 7.2 involve stuff that's going on in Southern California, LA, and stuff like that. Right now, if you think your offer is strong, you could say you want the seller to pay. If you represent the buyer, that's better. If you represent the seller, you'd want the buyer to pay. Chances are there's nothing to pay, not in Santa Clara County. Sometimes you could leave it blank. If I were filling it out for the buyer's benefit, I would be checking those boxes, although there really isn't anything in Santa Clara County that would fall into that requirement. There isn't. However, you might check it. You don't, why not? Escrow and title. Seller shall pay escrow fee. I'm talking about Santa Clara County, and shall pay for title insurance. And I put in my favorite title company, Seller's Choice. And I'm sure that's going to be Danielle's title company. Why not?
That's her last name.
Her last name is Sellers. So anyhow. So let's say this is not in Santa Clara County. This is in some other weird county. How would you find who pays what?
There's a table from the title company.
A table, yeah. Chicago title transfer tax. Now, I like Chicago title transfer tax.com because first of all, I can remember it. And what Chicago title transfer tax.com does, it has all the counties in California. And it says who customarily pays for what, which is a good thing to pay attention to because there's going to be a city transfer tax question coming up. And our property is in Morgan Hill. Does Morgan Hill have a city transfer tax? Which is no. San Jose does. there's a limited number, right? And by the way, as a listing agent, it sometimes doesn't look good if you write an offer and you are saying that the seller is going to pay the city transfer tax when the listing agent knows there is none, right? You understand? It kind of sort of looks like you're not paying attention and don't really know what's going on, right? So I would check first and write it based upon whatever that says. So why do the sellers pay for title and escrow? It's just because they do, right? That's just because they do in Santa Clara County. And so there's a general idea that whoever pays should get to pick. That's not always true, but you understand whoever pays gets to pick. Now, if you're in Alameda County, who pays for escrow and title? Buyer. Does that mean the buyer gets to pick? No, the buyer still doesn't get to pick. Who picks the title and escrow company? The listing agent. That's the practical answer. Now, theoretically, since this is probably being recorded and all that sort of stuff, am I recording this? I don't know. Yes, I am recording this. I'll give you the technically correct answer, which is it should be negotiated between the clients, the buyers, and the sellers. The reality is the listing agent picks. And it includes the areas where the buyer pays. Is it a good idea to fight with the listing agent over who the title company is in your offer? Does it seem like no? So I would just not get into that. Now, why do I say seller's choice? Sometimes we don't know what the title company is just from looking at what the listing agent says. Sometimes they tell you who the title company is, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have a prelim, which you would assume is the title company, but sometimes they've changed title companies. I'm lazy. I type in seller's choice, right? Let them pick. So buyer and seller shall pay. Seller pays the county transfer tax. That's everywhere. If this were San Jose, we would be selecting buyer, seller, city transfer tax, split 50-50. If this is a city where there is a transfer tax, which is not Morgan Hill, but is in San Jose. I believe it's in Milpitas. There's a limit. Look at the Chicago title transfer tax. How much is the county transfer tax? I had a client, I was with one of the agents that I work with. We were at her client's house about accepting an offer. She had me there to explain. And the seller said, so he was reading this paragraph. He says, how much are we talking about? How much is the county transfer tax?
It's in the table.
It's in the table. So an agent probably just doesn't know. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it varies from area to area.
No, it doesn't. It's $1.10 per thousand, county transfer tax. 55 cents for every $500. It's $1.10 per thousand. It's $1.10 per thousand. It does not vary. This is true everywhere in the state of California. It's $1.10 per thousand. So if it's an $800,000 house, that's $880. How much is the city transfer tax? It's comes out to $1.60. If you split it 50-50, it comes out to $1.65 per thousand for each. By the way, in the Chicago title transfer tax, it shows what that amount is. But as an agent, do you think somebody might ask you that? So how much is it? And you say, I don't know. I don't know. It's just, I don't know. I have no idea. I've never done this before. So I have no idea what your costs are likely to be. That's why I have Connie from Fidelity come in and, so she can talk about that. So I'm going to leave it there, even though, this is Morgan Hill, which doesn't have one. Homeowner association dues. Seller should pay. Seller should pay. Now, of course, everything is negotiable. I'm just saying if there's homeowner association documents and a transfer fee, generally that's a cost to the seller. Private transfer fees don't have very many in Santa Clara County that I'm aware of. Sometimes this is a fee in a subdivision. If you're nervous, you can click seller. Is there a home, now there's some other seller shall pay for, you shouldn't be checking a lot of other boxes unless, you know. Buyer, seller shall pay for the cost of a home warranty. Who should pay for the home warranty? Don't say the agent. Who should pay for the home warranty other than the agent? The seller, the buyer? Yeah, I would now, because we're back in the normal market, say seller. What would be a home warranty cost? $500 maybe?
Yeah.
And I'm going to violate my rule. And what my rule was is whoever pays gets to pick. But I'm going to say buyer's choice. Now, by the way, as a listing agent, I almost will always have a seller warranty already on the property. There's already a home warranty on the property, and my seller has already paid for it. And so it's no longer negotiable who the home warranty is going to be from unless you, as the buyer's agent, are willing to pay for it yourself. But most listings do not have a home warranty on them. Now, the reason you want to pick is because home warranty companies will send marketing material to the client, and they'll put on the marketing material the name of the agent who ordered the home warranty. Now, the reason why I wanted to be that agent when I was the listing agent, it means that your buyer is going to get stuff for the next year with my name on it, being mailed by the home warranty company. Whereas if you'd pick the home warranty company, it would have your name on it. Which would you rather? Have my name on it or your name on it? I'd rather have my name on it, right? So you would like to pick. If you say seller's choice, that means the listing agent gets to pick the home warranty, and they're the one who gets to call, and their name's on all the marketing materials. Is there air conditioning, pool, spa, or other? By the way, if you don't get the seller to pay and you're the buyer and you're going to pay for the buyer, my recommendation is if you're paying for this, well, and I'm not saying I never have, but if you're paying for this, get the best policy. If you're paying for the home warranty as the buyer, get the platinum policy. Because what you don't want is to brag to the buyers that you bought them a home warranty. And then when something breaks, it's not covered. Right? You understand? You went from you snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. Right? You understand? You know? So I want, if they call, they get satisfaction. Right? So I'll buy the upgrades, I'll have the best home warranty. Or the buyer could waive the right. I'm just saying that's what I would pick. If there's an air conditioner, pick it. All right? I'm just saying. You want a complete home warranty. Paragraph 8, items included. We're getting to another contingency. Paragraph 8B, existing electrical, mechanical, lighting, plumbing, heating fixtures, all these things are supposed to be included. Is there a stove in the property? If so, click on all stoves. Is there a refrigerator being included? Click on that. Why would there be an exception? Some people have refrigerators in the garage filled with beer. All right, isn't that what you do? That's what I've heard. Are washers and dryers included? If so, click that. Are there additional items? Generally, you don't want to be writing in a lot of extra stuff, but there might be. Existing integrated phone home automation, including necessary components such as intranet, internet-connected hardware or devices, control units other than non-dedicated mobile devices, electronics, and computers, and applicable software permissions, passwords, codes, and access information are included in the sale.
So does that mean it's a smart home?
If it's a smart home.
Okay.
Smart homes for dumb people or dumb, anyhow, I have a dumb home. But yes, they're not supposed to be controlling your temperature after they've moved out. Leased or liened items. Is it a good thing that there are solar panels on the top of this house? Good thing? Is that a good thing? Solar panels? Good thing? Not really. It depends. So solar equipment depreciates at a rather rapid rate. If it's a leased solar equipment, and by the way, some of the solar companies record something called a recorded fixture against it's in the prelim, basically making the solar claim part of the claims against the title to this property. And this may seem bizarre, but it's sometimes easier to get qualified for a home loan than to qualify for a solar lease. And the reason is that the home is appreciating and the solar panel is not. So what will happen is your buyers will do a little Google search for the name of the solar company. And do you know what they usually find out regarding reviews of the solar company? People hate the solar company. And when they start reading all the hateful reviews, they're going to say, we don't want the solar panels. By the way, they oftentimes have an $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 payout. If you don't continue the lease, somebody has to write them $8,000 or $9,000 or $10,000. They're supposed to give you, according to this paragraph, copies of the leases and lien items. And this is something that you're going to read with your client, because there's a lot of issues that could come from solar. If it's a PACE loan that they use to get the solar, it's really ugly. It's an ugly thing. I'm not going to go into that. But look what this says. Delivered to buyer all written materials such as lease warranty concerning such items. Look at this. Buyer's ability to assume any such lease or willingness to accept the property subject to any such lien or encumbrance is a contingency in favor of buyer and seller. Now that's unusual in that it's a contingency for both of them. What that means is, let's say your buyer says, I don't like the lease, so I reject it. I don't want to take over the lease. The seller can cancel the contract. That's what it means. If your buyer is unwilling to assume the lease or the lien on the solar equipment and the seller doesn't like it, they can cancel the contract. It says it's a contingency for both buyer and seller. Seller could cancel the contract. Items excluded from sale, brackets. So if they remove the big screen TV, what happens to the brackets? Well, what it says as a default is that they're going to stay in the property, which is not a convenient or necessary thing, right? Because that means you have to buy a monitor that fits those brackets. Or it says will be removed and holes and other damage shall be repaired but not painted. So do they have big screens on the wall? Are you worried about it? Right? This says, do you want them to leave the brackets? You can put something there. Do you want them to take the brackets and fix the holes? Closing and possession. Feel free to ask questions if you feel like it. Is this an owner-occupied residence or not? Why is this important, whether we check a box or not check a box on 9A? What effect does this have on the buyer's world? If we check the box does not intend, what does that do to the buyer? That's it, very good. It raises their interest rate. If this is not owner occupied, it's going to affect their interest rate. Not positively either. People are more likely to walk away from homes they do not live in. So usually the buyer is going to, seller occupied or vacant property. If you don't check anything, and by the way, if you don't know what to do for most of the time, just don't check anything. If you don't check anything, this paragraph says that the possession is going to be given to buyer on the day escrow closes as of a particular time. That's what it says. Seller or occupied possession shall be delivered to buyer at 6 p.m. on the date of close of escrow, or no later than 10 days, 5 days, 7 days after close of escrow. That's what we would be doing for the, rent back. Does everybody understand that paragraph? If you don't check anything, then the buyer gets to move in at 6 p.m. the day escrow closes, but you could give the seller some time and write and finish that. Seller remaining in possession after close of escrow. If you check these boxes, forms will launch. There are two forms. One is the SIP form, the seller in possession form. And this is what you're supposed to use if it's less than 30 days. And then there's a residential lease form, which you're supposed to use if it's more than 30 days. What is the most amount of time a lender would typically allow the seller to be there without it causing trouble for the loan?
I think 60 days.
60 days, very good. So you don't do 90, right? You understand? If it's all cash, they can do what they want. But if they're getting a loan, they can't just let it go for more than 60 days. Now, the difference between what the SIP form does is it answers some questions like, who's going to pay for insurance? Do you understand the seller's homeowner's insurance ends when the seller sells the property? Does the buyer's insurance cover renters? Would the buyer's homeowner policy cover renters? The answer is no, doesn't cover renters. However, guess what you have? A renter in the property. Is it possible for the buyers to get a rider from their insurance agent that would cover the renter? Answer is yes, the insurance agent would be happy to sell you one. Would you want to discuss who's going to pay for that? Should it be paid by the buyer or the seller? What about the rent? How much, if you're going to charge rent, and we're back into charging rent again, normal market, what is the rent you would charge? This is when we get to the SIP form, which I'm just going to do this and then I'll let it go. How do you determine what the rent is? What would you write in for rent?
I do a search on Craigslist and find what the going rent is for that area.
That's a better answer than I'm used to getting.
Or go to renovator.com.
That's good. Those are both good answers. So what I would say a typical real estate agent does, but you're not typical, that's a good thing, is they write in buyer's PITI. The rent will be whatever the buyer's principal, interest, taxes, and insurance are for that month and per day. Now, there's a lot of problems with that approach. Number one, do we know right off the bat how much that is? We don't know. Do you think the seller might get sticker shock when they find out how much that is? Yes. It's much better to have a dollar amount, but that's the SIP form. We're not doing it. So we're going to assume for this one that they're not doing a rent back. If you are, you would click that box. It also asks the questions, who pays for utilities? Is there a security deposit? And other kind of useful questions. If there's a tenant in the property, you know, that's all I can say. Just sigh. Right. If it's your listing, get the tenants out, because it's going to cost the seller a lot more than they're getting in rent. But tenant could remain in possession because you're buying it as an investment. You don't want them to leave. But I'm just assuming that there's no tenant for this purpose. And then tenant, we're not going to check. Then there's stuff to read. Statutory, paragraph 10. This is a list of all the things that the seller is supposed to give to the buyer if the seller has them. Now, look at this. It says, nothing stated herein relieves a buyer's brokerage firm, if any, from the obligation to conduct a reasonably competent and diligent visual inspection of the accessible areas of the property and disclose on section 4 of the TDS. This whole class has been TDS, hasn't it? Or AVID. Material facts affecting the value or desirability of the powder that should have been revealed by an inspection. Complete any, look at this line, any sections on all disclosures required to be completed by a buyer's brokerage firm. It also says someplace else. So the seller's supposed to fill out all this stuff. You're supposed to do your own agent's visual inspection disclosure. If there's changes, you're supposed to tell them 3 days after delivery in person or 5 days by mail if there's been a change. So if the seller has given you their transfer disclosure statement and the listing agent has given their AVID, and your buyer signs those prior to making the offer, or it's submitted with the offer, then the buyer doesn't get any time to back out of the transaction because they knew it when they wrote the offer. If the seller or the seller's agent has not provided the required TDS or AVID, the buyer gets 3 days from receipt in order to change their mind. If the seller amends the transfer disclosure statement, the buyer gets 3 more days to change their mind. And the more escape hatches. By the way, in the market we're in, you're going to have to understand, how many of you have had a license for more than 12 years? Let's just see. I'm it. I'm sorry about that. I was just surprised. So I've had a license for more than 12 years. What happens in this market? So the market is stabilizing and maybe the market starts to go down. What happens is your buyers are in contract on a property and something comes on the market that's nicer, newer, better, bigger, and is priced for less because the market is dropping. And your clients want out. They want out. Now, this may seem like a bizarre thing, but you need to, in the falling market, to be aware of how can your buyer get out if they need to get out. And so any of these things, like for example, let's say it says in the TDS that the seller has noticed no plumbing leaks, but the property inspector says there's a plumbing leak, then now this may seem like a mean-spirited thing to do, but I might write the listing agent an email that says that the seller's TDS is faulty because it says no plumbing leaks and there are plumbing leaks, and we request an amendment to it. And then when the amendment comes, we use the 3 days to get out. All right. By the way, for the seller is supposed to answer every question in the SPQ. I didn't go through that, but it's up here. It says they have to answer every question in the SPQ. If they don't, and you ask the listing agent to fill it in, and then they provide it, you could argue you have 3 more days to back out. So NHD, other booklets. Now, if you're representing the buyer, you're supposed to get a receipt from the buyer, and the listing agent is probably going to give you a form if you don't have one for the environmental hazards, the earthquake safety, the lead-based paint, and all that other stuff. How many of you actually give that stuff to clients? Good. Many agents get clients to sign the receipt for receiving it, but they never give it to them. By the way, it's all available in zip forms through EPUBs, which I could show you, which is a document you can get in zip forms. You can send it to them as a PDF, have them electronically sign it. You also, the home warranty companies print them out with their advertising on the back. If you find a friendly home warranty company, they'll give you a stack. But I just send it to them digitally and have them sign. Withholding, Megan's Law database. Does everybody realize that there's a website where you can find all the sexual deviants that are in a given area? It's called Craigslist Personals. Isn't that the website where you find all the, never mind. Anyhow, there's a website called crimereports.com. Now that website, this Megan's Law website is a good one, but crimereports.com and some of the other websites take information from all of these websites. And they find a lot more stuff than the Megan's Law site. They have everything that's on the Megan's Law site, but they have a lot more stuff, right? And if, by the way, is that a legitimate investigation for your buyer to conduct during their investigation period? Crime reports in the area, sex offenders in the area. Crimereports.com, there are others, but you would want to point that out to people. You understand, you don't want them to move in and then find out that there's a convicted pedophile across the street, right? If they should know that now rather than discussing it with you and your lawyer later. Notice regarding here, condominium or planned development disclosures. Is there a homeowner association? Is there CC&Rs? I don't change anything in paragraph 1. Seller has 7 days. They should already have them. Paragraph 2 says, If the property is a condominium or is located in a planned development or other common interest subdivision, seller has 3 days after acceptance to request the documents. And buyer's approval of the CI, which is common interest disclosures, is a contingency of this agreement. So it says the seller is supposed to give you copies of the HOA docs, and your buyer is supposed to be able to read them. How many of you read HOA documents with your clients? Good for you. I sold a condo, buyer moves in, 4 days later, there's an $8,000 assessment that was due. The buyer's agent calls me up, yelling at me, how dare you hide this from us? And I said, first of all, I told him I have not read the HOA documents. I represent the seller. I'm the listing agent. I rarely read them, right? It's not my job. It's the buyer's agent's job. And so I said, you know, you were given a copy of the meeting minutes for the last 2 years of the HOA. I'll make you a side bet that they talked about this in the meetings at the HOA. I'll bet that it's mentioned several times in the HOA documents. And what I said to the guy, I know what you did. You took the stack, you gave it to the buyer, you took the other stack and you shoved it in a drawer and no one looked at it. Don't tell me it wasn't disclosed. It was, you just didn't read it. Just didn't read it. Right, so would that be a good thing for you to like maybe peruse? By the way, I've actually had buyers initial next to stuff in the HOA documents. I was selling this townhouse up in Almaden, and did you know in Almaden Hills they have wild pigs? Right, wild pigs. So in the HOA documents, they are talking about wild pigs. The wild, even though it is not a non-contingent, is it SPQ or TDS is amended? I don't know what all this says. Yes, if any of those things are amended, you get 3 days to back out. So wild pigs, and the HOA meeting minutes are talking about wild pigs and all the problems they're having with the wild pigs. They formed a wild pig committee at the HOA. They hired a professional pig trapper. I was not aware this was a potential career path, right? You understand? I didn't know you could be a professional pig trapper. They caught like a dozen wild pigs one weekend. Now, you understand? We're not talking about a pig here and a pig there. We're talking pig everywhere. They were running around the place. I had I highlighted it and had her initial next to it. I told her that I would buy her teenage son a crossbow and get them a barbecue pit. By the way, you're not allowed to do that. But she decided not to buy the place because of the wild pigs. So did you understand? Somebody ought to, what's another thing in the HOA documents that you would look for?
Litigation.
Litigation. The lender's going to look for that too. Is there any litigation going on in the property? What's another thing you'd want to look for? Restrictions on renting it in the future. Some of them have restrictions on your ability to rent it in the future. What's another thing? Parking. Another thing. Whether or not you can operate a business anywhere in that development. Most of the good stuff you're going to find in the meeting minutes of the HOA and in the bylaws and rules. Right? That's where some of the good stuff is. Condition of the property. Unless otherwise agreed in writing, the property is being sold as is in its present physical condition, subject to buyer's inspections rights. So whenever I see listing agents type in as is sale, it's been an as is sale for like a long, long time. What is a non as is sale? And the answer is it's when the seller is obligated to fix stuff. In the old days, it used to say the seller was going to give the buyer a Section 1 termite clearance, a 1-year leak-free warranty from a licensed roofing contractor. All plumbing leaks would be repaired. All debris would be removed. Broken or cracked glass would be replaced. Broken seals on dual pane windows would be replaced. I mean, there's a list. We don't have that list anymore, right? Unless you're doing PRDS. But we don't have that list anymore. Buyer is strongly advised to conduct investigations of the entire property in order to determine if and or have permits issued. So can you do permit checks? Do you know how to do a permit check? How would you find out how to do a permit check in San Jose?
Check with the city.
Check with the city. And you know, there's another way to do it that's even quicker. You open up Google and you type in, how do I check building permits in San Jose? Guess what you're going to find? A link to a website. And you can download building permits and look at them. So let's say that the buyer has been provided by the seller a property inspection, a roof inspection, a chimney inspection, a termite inspection. Should you order more?
It's up to the buyer.
Up to the buyer. Well, you're the agent. What would you suggest? Should I just accept these or should I get my own?
Except the ones that they.
Yeah, the seller, yeah. Try.
Well, I would read through it and see if there's anything suspicious, right? If there's
Suspicious.
something that needs follow-up, then I might get my own.
That's a good, see, my answer is we don't want to just necessarily order another brace of general inspections, but look at the property inspection. This is what I do when I'm going over a property inspection with the buyer. I'm looking for things that say further inspection, further recommendations for investigations or inspections. So for example, they might say the electrical panel looks like it's out of date, or it's a one that's been flagged as maybe not being. I would recommend that you get an electrician to look at it. I would recommend that you get a plumber to look at the plumbing leaks. I'd recommend you get the big crack in the beam, which is in the garage, great big beam, great big crack. So who would be able to do all those inspections that I just suggested? A general contractor. And you know what the general contractor will give you? A bid for what it will cost. Does the property inspector give you a bid for what it will cost? No, not the property inspector. Termite, yes. Roof, yes. Chimney, yes. But not a property inspector. So who could tell us, who should say, is that big crack in the beam in the garage dangerous or not? How about a general contractor? How about that? Have a contractor go in and look at it. And could they tell you what it would cost for the electrical and the plumbing and all that? Yeah. So what I would tell the buyer is rather than just getting another one, because it's probably going to say you ought to have an electrician, you ought to have a plumber, you ought to have a roofer, they're going to say the same things. Why don't we get those guys to come and inspect it? And you could get one general contractor to do it. Buyer's investigation of property, paragraph 12. Buyer's acceptance of the condition of and any other matter affecting the property is a contingency of this agreement. Look at that sentence. Buyer's acceptance of the condition of the property and any other matter is a contingency of this agreement. So the buyer says, I drove by at night and I didn't like the kind of people I saw hanging out in the street. Can they back out of the contract? Any other matters? It was noisy. I went by at night, it was noisy. Can they back out? Yes. I checked crime reports, school rankings. Don't like it. They can back out. See how broad? That's a big escape hatch. And then it goes on to say you can do anything you want pretty much to investigate the property, except don't break anything, don't create any liens on the property. I've had asbestos inspections, I've had radon gas inspections. I've had on 2 occasions somebody that was there to get evil spirits out of the house. I'm not kidding, twice. I've had a spiritual ghost inspection at the request of the buyer. They had their own person, by the way, but they wanted to go in and, you know, anyhow. So you let them do it. They can have it. They can do anything they want. By the way, asbestos is everywhere, right? So the asbestos inspection, it's like going off. It looked like one of those old Geiger counters, like from the 1950s. It's kind of what it looked like. And so they were like freaking out. Oh my God, there's asbestos. And the guy walks out and he holds it next to the sidewalk and it goes off way higher than in the house. He walks out on the street and holds it down and it shoots up right to the, you know, I'm just saying. You're not going to want to, anyhow, there's asbestos in your house and radon gas. I'm not going to explain more of that. Title investing. Within the buyer shall be provided a current preliminary title report. The preliminary report is only an offer of the title insurance, the policy may not contain every item. Buyer's review of the preliminary report and any other matters which may affect title are a contingency of this agreement. The preliminary title report and any other matters affecting title. So the buyer gets the plot map, and the buyer's engineer and notices that the dimensions on the plot map differ from the dimensions that are in the MLS. In other words, the lot size is different. When you take the plot map and you multiply, you get a different number than what it says in the MLS. And the MLS number came from, I thought I saw another question. The MLS number came from the county records. Did you know that sometimes, by the way, I had a transaction last year in Sunnyvale, and I could show you 2 different programs that access the county records that have different numbers for the lot size. Right, Realist has a different number than RPR. Realist had a different number than the title company. So now the buyer wants out, right? Because the title, and by the way, you probably have noticed this, but on the plot map, it actually has the words that this is intended only for tax purposes and is not designed to be an accurate representation. They went out and measured the lot themselves. Engineer, right? Engineer went out and he measured the lot. Right. Of course, you realize that fences aren't necessarily the property line. Anyhow, but does everybody see any other matters affecting title? And all of this is tied to paragraph 14, which is coming up. Paragraph 14, I don't change anything with paragraph A, which says the seller has 7 days to give us stuff, but buyer has so many days. This is the universal somewhat, except for loan and appraisal. This is what all the contingency periods are tied to, except for loan and appraisal. How long would it take you to get inspections, reports, and that sort of thing? Let's just say 10 days. There's some value in having all the contingencies due at the same time if you can do it. If there's septic, it's going to take longer maybe. If it's got a well, it's got more issues. Right, but generally you could get an inspector out right away. They're not as busy as they were. All right, now I'm not explaining every line to you because I know you guys are going to read it 8 times every week, aren't you? Read it aloud. If you have a dog, you can practice reading it to your dog, but the dog will get bored too, right? You'll get bored. But does everybody understand that being somebody that helps agents with their transactions, I would say 90% of all the questions could have been answered if the agent had read the contract. The reality is most agents have never read the contract. They know how to fill out a contract, but they've never actually, read it. Right? And if you're thinking, I could ask you questions and we'll see how much the contract is. How about this? You make an offer. You've accepted all the inspections and reports that the seller has provided. So you have removed your property inspection contingency. You do not have a property inspection contingency. Can you still have inspections? No inspection contingency. Can you still have inspections? Yes? True? Can you still do it, but you have no contingency? Paragraph 14D5, B5, buyer shall have access to the property to conduct inspections, investigations for, notice that says 17 days. I don't change that. After acceptance, whether or not any part of the buyer's investigation contingency has been waived or removed. Whether or not. So even if you've accepted their inspections, you can still inspect it yourself. I've had many arguments with agents over that. Removal of contingencies. We're going to check that box because if you've gotten your funding all lined up, you might want to remove a contingency. Basically, what this is saying in the seller to perform and buyer removal of contingencies, and for funsies, I have a class on contingencies. Wouldn't that be fun? There's a quiz about what time, I give some examples and ask when does the contingency have to be. It's a lot of fun because you'll see most people have different dates and times when the contingency has to be removed. What this is saying is that if you're given 10 days to remove the contingencies, as I'm talking about from the buyer's perspective, what happens within that 10 days is you could make a list of things you do not like. Paragraph 14B2, within the time period specified in paragraph 14B1, buyer may request that seller make repairs or take any other action regarding the property. You use a form called RR, the repair request form, which by the way could simply say I want a credit. So during the 10-day period, your buyer and you should, before you remove the contingency, sit down, go through all the inspections and reports. And this is what I say to the buyer. So what do you think? Do you want to buy the house? What do you think? Right? We've done all these, you read them. What do you think? Do you still want to buy the house? Do you want to ask the seller to, now, by the way, asking the seller to fix stuff has its own problems. What's the problem with asking the seller to fix stuff? What's the problem with that? Who's not going to like it if we give them a copy? The lender's not going to like it. The lender's not going to like it. So if you send addendums and things like that that says the seller's going to fix the roof or repair stuff, don't send it to your loan agent. Ask if you're thinking, well, I shouldn't follow that advice, Mike, because I think that will be defraud. Ask your loan agent if they want to see it. Ask them. See what they ask them if they want to see the termite report. Look at their face when you ask them that question. Oh, right. So if you say in documents that you provide to the lender that there is something wrong with the property, that's going to have trouble with your buyer getting a loan. It's a lot cleaner to, and they don't want to fix anything anyhow. It's a lot cleaner to ask for a credit. Don't say why, right? And I actually usually don't use the RR form. I just use an addendum, and it's a seller to credit buyer, $10,000. That's all it says, right? That means the lender wants to see that. You understand? Lender is going to have to see the credit. The lender is going to have to see the credit. And if you say RR, if you use the RR form, then the lender might think that the credit is tied to a property defect. So just do an addendum that says seller to credit buyer $10,000. Don't say why, right? Believe me, your loan agent does not want to know. So if, and then the seller can respond. And then the buyer, so you can go back and forth. Now, my suggestion is if the contingency period is going to be, what day is it? Friday, I would want to talk to my clients now about what they want to do with the property and what they want. And I would be talking to the listing agent today. And by the way, at first we want to make this an informal thing, my client, but you send them copies of everything you've got that says there's something wrong. And you say, well, my clients are concerned about the problem with the plumbing. And we were wondering if the seller would be willing to give the buyer some credit towards that. You see, it's way better to do this than have the listing agent go talk to the seller and talk back and forth so that when you make the addendum, it's already agreed to. But if you can't do that, just write up the addendum. If the buyer does not remove their contingencies in time, the seller can give the buyer what's called a notice to perform. And then the buyer has 2 days, which are calendar days, unless it falls on a weekend or a legal holiday, in which case it rolls over to the next business day. And you have 2 days to remove your contingency. If you don't remove the contingency, the next form you might see is called a notice of cancellation. All right. There's also a notice to close escrow. That's a different notice. Would you like me to do a class on all the different forms? Would that be fun? Right? Just to, go through them, right? But there's a notice of cancellation, there's a notice to perform, and then there's a notice to close. This is what you do when you have Chase as your lender and it's supposed to close on Friday and the loan agent tells you they haven't drawn the loan docs yet. Right? How long does it take from when the lender sends out loan docs to when it could close? How long is that period? Minimum. 3 days. So if it's Wednesday and they have not sent out the loan docs, we are not closing this week. Right? It's not going to happen. And what means if we tell the seller that too early, by the way, if you tell them too early, this is sort of a weird, back and forth. I would like them to know as soon as possible. And if we tell them too early and they have other offers, they're going to give us a notice to close in advance, right? Whereas I might rather wait for them to say on Friday you have 2 days, which means Monday, and we might be able to close that. So notice, so those are those seller's right to cancel. There's nothing else to mark here. Effect of buyer's removal of contingencies. What that says is if you've removed your contingencies, that is no longer an escape hatch. If you remove the loan contingency, there's no loan contingency. You can't just say, I don't like it. I want to get out. If you've removed the contingency. By the way, paragraph 12, the one that says buyer's acceptance of the condition of the property and any other matters affecting the property is a contingency of the agreement. That's the one that lets you out for just about any reason, right? So you can remove a lot of, I was asked this question, you guys should, can we renegotiate the price as of the day the loan those contingencies are to be removed? Remember we said 10 days. Can we just say to the seller, we're willing to move forward, but we want you to knock off 20 grand? Does the contract allow us to just renegotiate the price because we don't like the price? The answer is no. That's not what it says. It says that you're supposed to act in good faith, and if you don't discover anything new, then you can't negotiate. You're not supposed to renegotiate the price. How could you find new stuff? Crime reports, school rankings, right? Think of things that the seller has not provided you, right? And then you could say, well, my clients really don't want to buy the house. Did you know that there are 4 sex offenders in that area? So they don't think it's worth that much. It's going to cause them trouble when they want to sell it in the future. We think an adjustment in the price. We didn't know it. See, this is the important line. We did not know it when we made the offer. Had we known it when we made the offer, we wouldn't have offered that much. Do you understand? That is the logic you're supposed to say. You're not supposed to say, well, we're not going to remove our contingencies unless you lower the price, right? You might have difficulty getting your deposit back. I've refused to give clients their deposit back when I was a listing agent because they did a stupid thing with the contingencies. And I told them that when I found another buyer and entered into contract, I'd give them their money back, right? Because they gave me the wrong, they said, the last one, they said that the backyard wasn't big enough for a kidney-shaped pool. So they wanted either a credit or they wanted to cancel. That's not a good reason either, because they could have seen that when they looked at the house, right? I had one say that the 3-car garage was only 2.5. They wanted a no, you looked at the garage when you before you made, right? You understand, you have to come up with something new that you discovered, not things that were obvious when you made the offer. Just saying. Effective cancellation on deposits. I have been doing this for a really long time, and I have never had or heard of a buyer that has actually lost their deposit in a residential transaction. I asked Orhan once, because he and I were in different parts of the jungle. I was down here and we had 5 offices and about 600 agents at one time, and he was up there and had his own thing going, and neither of us can recall ever seeing a buyer get their money back, lose their money, seriously, never, right? So I'm not saying it couldn't happen. The California Association of Realtors says that they have evidence that it has happened, but I've never known it to happen. However, what this paragraph says is that if the buyer breaches the contract and doesn't have a good reason, the buyer can lose their deposit. That's what it says. But it's not an automatic forfeiture. See, this is the problem if you represent the seller. It's not like automatically they get the money and they can go home. It says in this paragraph that both the buyer and the seller have to sign a release of the deposit. Is your buyer going to sign a release giving their deposit to the seller? Do you think they're going to sign that? No, they don't want to sign that. Can the listing agent put it back on the market and sell it to somebody else while there's an open escrow and an open contract? The answer is no, the escrow company won't let them do that. So this transaction has to be ended, and your buyer is not going to end it unless they get their money back. So after a lot of pushing and shoving and pounding of the chest, they probably are going to give you the money back. All right. And there's a $1,000 penalty if final verification of condition. A common question I get from new agents and even some used ones is, I'm looking for the walkthrough form and I can't find it. I've been at the CAR zip forms. I've been looking now for like 30 minutes. Walkthrough, I can't find it. And that's because it's not called a walkthrough form. We called it a walkthrough form, we being real estate agents. But that's not what it's called, and you will not find it. It's called verification of condition. That's the form. What is the purpose of that form? Well, that will be one I'll go through in my forms, my here a form, there a form class. Everywhere a form. It's not a contingency of the contract, isn't that what it says? Basically, it's to make sure they didn't break things or, I don't know, didn't break things, did work they said they were going to do. What happens if they broke stuff and the buyer's not happy? What can the buyer do? There's only one thing you can really do. You can complain. And then they say, well, they're not going to do anything. You have only one option, and that's not close, which is not a good option. Or you could close and sue them in small claims court. How's that sound? Does that sound like a good option? And as their agent, you could go with them. Isn't that nice? You have to show up like about 8 in the morning, and then your case is heard like at 4:30 in the afternoon, right? And you sit there watching people yell and fight with each other and having their friends all testify that the other person is, Anyhow, I digress. Repairs shall be completed, final verification of condition. You shouldn't be having the seller fix too much stuff. Now, I've had them remove the popcorn ceiling before escrow closes. I mean, you just have to keep that away from the loan agent. You understand what I'm saying? Right? Removing stuff, repairing stuff, just don't show it to the loan agent. Prorations of property taxes, I usually don't, talk about that. Compensation, there's nothing really here. I tell them representative capacity. And when we looked, this one was a trust. So representative capacity, right now we're talking about it on behalf of the buyer. Is the buyer an LLC? Is the buyer a trust? Are they operating for an LLC or a trust? That's what that's about. Joint escrow instructions, I never fill that out. Remedies for breach of contract. Liquidated damages says that if the buyer breaches the contract and the buyer does not have cause, the buyer could lose up to 3%. Anything over 3% has to be rebated to the buyer. Dispute resolution, mediation, and arbitration. The California Association of Realtors has little booklets you could give people on this. This is what I say to a client. Mediation is like marriage counseling. So you go to the marriage counselor, and the marriage counselor says, stop smoking, you ought to stop smoking cigars in the house, right? And your wife says, I don't care, I like to smoke cigars. Do you understand, do you have to do what the marriage counselor says? Do you have to do what they say?
Nope.
And it says, no, it sounds like a guy that knows, right? You don't have to do what the marriage counselor says. So that's mediation. It's like marriage counseling. Arbitration is divorce court, right? That's what that is. And this is a binding arbitration, which means you can't really appeal it in any practical sense. Right? And by the way, so most people initial mediation and arbitration. If I wanted to go to, let's say I've initialed mediation and arbitration. Mediation, by the way, you can't initial or uninitial, it's required. But I've initialed arbitration. Could I take them to small claims court instead?
Yeah.
Answer is yes.
If it's under $10,000 or $12,000.
Well, we can only get 10. But there's a paragraph here that says exclusions. The following matters are excluded from mediation and arbitration, and it says any matter that is within the jurisdiction of a probate, small claims, or bankruptcy court. Small claims court is exempt from arbitration. Rest of this is just stuff. When it says days in the contract, does that mean calendar days or business days? When it says in the contract days, does it mean calendar days or business days? It means calendar days. Look at F, under definitions. Days means calendar days. There is an exception. And the exception is the 3 business days to get your money into escrow. The EMD, earnest money deposit, those 3 days are business days. All other days are calendar days. They're not business days. However, as it says in the definition of days, if it falls on a legal holiday or on a non-business day, it rolls over to the next available day. So paragraph 31, you should type in your name. Well, I've written a lot of offers for other people. And by the way, the default, by putting my name in paragraph 31, it says that communication of acceptance or rejection can go to me. It doesn't have to go directly to the buyer. The other thing you need to know about paragraph 31 is it says the buyer has 3 days, business or calendar? Boy, has it been that long? 3 calendar days to decide whether or not they want to accept your offer. If you don't do anything, the seller has 3 days to think about it. You can revoke your offer at any time. However, does the seller need 3 days to decide if $3 million is a good price? Do you think the seller needs 3 days to decide if they like your price? Do you think the seller needs 3 hours to decide? Do you think if we called the seller on the phone and you just said the number to them, that they would tell you yes or no?
Yeah.
Right? They would probably say no, or okay, that sounds good. So if you're making the offer, I would always ask the listing agent, is the seller available? How soon do you think you can present the offer? If I got it to you today at 2 o'clock, how soon do you think you could present the offer? And they say I could do it by 6 o'clock. I would give them to 7 or 8 to accept this offer. What you don't want is them shopping your offer. And by the way, if I'm the listing agent, I'm going to do this. You give me an offer on my listing and you give me 3 days. I did this on this house in East Palo Alto. First offer came in at 1.45. And so the next agent that called, he gave me 3 days. Next agent called me and said, do you have any offers? I said, yes. He said, would you mind telling me, the range that I said 1.45. He said, oh, all right, thank you. He presented an offer for 1.6. Another agent called me and said, do you have any offers? I said, yes, 2. They said, can you give me, I said, the highest one is 1.6. They said, oh, all right. They came in at 1.8. Eventually, the first one who made the offer for 1.45, his client ended up buying it for 1.22. In other words, what happened was I kept bidding it up until it went up from 1.45 to 1.2 something, and they ended up spending another $60,000 because they still wanted to buy the house. If they had given me 2 hours, my seller would have accepted that offer. You understand? He would have accepted that offer. But because I had time to play with it, they ended up buying it for a whole lot more money than what they originally were offering. You don't want to give them 3 days. Right? Unless there's a really good, they're in Singapore. And, I've had people say that to me. I've sold homes to people I had a seller that was in Singapore not that long ago. They have computers there. You know, what do you mean you need 3 days to contact somebody in China and ask them if they want to do it? Don't give me that, right? You know, you send them an email. You know, they don't need 3 days. So be careful with that. Make sure that the time period, ask the listing agent when they can present, give them a little bit of a buffer and put that in. Don't just, if you leave it alone, it says 3 days. That's for them to accept it. Here, notice how this has all been pretty much filled out because I used the MLS Connect and it imported all that information. That takes a long time to type in. I don't do anything with this. Buyer's inspection advisory, they sign it, we're done. All right. You save it. Why not? And even if the buyer's in the room, a lot of times I use e-sign right from here. Does the buyer want you to print out something and print it out and sign with a pen? Some do, a lot don't. So on my computer, I might have gone through the offer and they're like, yes, right then and there, I want them to sign it. By the way, if this is the first time, I might have a printed version because I want them to sign it right there. If they say, well, we're gonna, you know, yes, email it to us, we'll look at it later, and then maybe ask them to sign it right there. Right, you understand? I've had people do it on their phones in my office after I went through the offer. Right now, we have to do it now, right? Because they'll get buyer's remorse. So we could add, I'm not going to go through electronic signatures today, but notice right from the form, it takes me to electronic signatures. How was that? Was that a useful? That was how to do it, as opposed to all the stuff you might want to think about on, you know, ins and outs. All right. Someday we'll do, maybe next week, I'll go through some of the fun forms. How about that? Fun with forms. Doesn't that sound like a great topic? Fun with forms. Thank you, guys. Goodbye. Thank you.